go to your journal and get the definition for rational function. Or you can write the definition on the side of your packet somewhere. And then take a look at the core concept, and we're going to be looking at the function y equals 1 over x, and you'll see today that the graph of this looks something like a curve in this quadrant and a curve in this quadrant. Now go to example 1 in 7.2. We're going to graph the function g of x equals 4 over x and compare this graph with the function 1 over x that I just talked about. We know that there's asymptotes at x equals 0 and y equals 0. The reason for this is because we cannot plug in 0 to the denominator, so we will never get 0 for our function. And for g of x, I'm going to make an xy table to plot some points. And I'll do the same thing for my f of x. So for f of x, we're going to get negative 1/2, negative 1, 1, and 1/2 in our table. And if we plot those points, we'll get two curves. You could just plot the first point and maybe even the second. So 2, 1/2, negative 2, negative 1/2. And just sketch these curves along the x and y axis, because those are our vertical asymptotes and horizontal asymptotes. For g of x, if you see a bigger number than 1, so I see 4 in the top instead of 1, that just means that the graph f of x comes out a little bit. So plugging in these points, we get negative 2, negative 4, 4, 2, and 4/3. And then when I plot these, I get negative 1, negative 4, 1, 4, 2, negative 2, and 2, 2. So the graph looks something like this. It's a curve that's just further away from the x and y axis. My g of x would be here, my f would be here. Okay? And what we want to say is that both graphs are in the first and third quadrant. And you can say that f is a little bit closer to the x and y axis than g. For example 2, if you go to the next page, we're doing the same thing, graphing a function, except this time we can see x plus 2. That's going to give us my vertical asymptote. And my vertical asymptote is going to be at x equals negative 2, because we have a problem when x is negative 2. We know that we can't divide by 0. And then my horizontal asymptote is at this point. So my horizontal asymptote is at y equals negative 1. And I'm making dotted lines. They're not perfectly straight, but I'm making dotted lines at my asymptotes. And then what I want to do, I know it's going to be a curve in certain quadrants. Because this is a negative 4, the curves are going to be in the opposite quadrants from example 1. So if I just plot a few points, this is what I get. So here's my table with a few points, and I'll plot negative 4, 1. So then when you graph your curves, they're going to look like this and approach the vertical and horizontal asymptotes that we've graphed. We'll practice this again in class tomorrow.